First of all, if we need to expand this outliner, we can always click on this line up here and drag this to wherever we need. So we have more room to work with stuff in our scene. So that's helpful there. And then of course we can do things like hide the visibility of objects. We could click this, which locks the object in place. Basically, you can't accidentally move it if, say, it's something you don't want to be moved. Or we can click this button to toggle renderability or not. So if we were to click this and then press render, it's not going to show up. So I'll press go back here and turn that back on. So if I were to double right click over here and say add a torus shape and then press D to duplicate this a few times, maybe press B to do a border select and then duplicate all of those. So we've got all these objects now down here in our outliner. At some point you may have been attempting to select something in your outliner and notice that when you were trying to select it, it got highlighted in gray rather than being selected. So say if I were to click here, this becomes highlighted in gray rather than being selected. The point of this functionality is to allow you to select multiple of these items, and then in Blender default, you would right click and then you could select a restrict option. We talked about how you can turn off the visibility, lock things, or hide the renderability. There's a lot of things that I do not like about this method. I don't like that, unlike these where I can just click and drag and hide these or display these, I can't click and drag this. I also don't like that these aren't immediately selected. So for instance, in default Blender, if you were to press B to do a border select, what that select would do is rather than select the objects directly, it would highlight them. And there was really no way around this, so I had to build a custom key to actually make a border select when you press B actually select things. So rather than pressing B to do a border select and all these get highlighted, we can just press B to do a border select, click and drag, and then all of the objects that we select are selected. They're both selected in the 3D view and in the outliner. So in the same way we mentioned, you can press Shift A in the 3D view, and under groups you have these restriction options. You can also just right click in the outliner and you have those same restriction options. So with all these objects selected, I could say I could hide selected, which you see turns off the visibility of those, or I could unhide selected there. I could lock all of that selection, unlock it, and this allows us to totally bypass that kind of extra highlighting business. So if something accidentally gets highlighted rather than just directly selected, you can just click that gray area to get rid of that, but mostly that's no longer necessary to use. So I'm going to go ahead and press B to do a border select, select all these, and press X to delete all those. If we were to say add some more objects here, so if I double right clicked here and added a monkey and press D to duplicate that 3 or 4 times, and so we've got some more objects here. We can also click and drag our mouse to enable or disable these options here, which is nice. So you don't have to sit there and click each individual one. So it's kind of a nice fast way to do that. And we can also directly parent objects straight from the outliner. Say I wanted to parent one of these Suzanne heads to this cube. I could click the object by its little icon, the little icon by its name, and then just click and drop it over whatever object I want to be the parent. So you'll see the little message pop up, drop to set parent. So if I would do that, now if I click the plus sign in the cube, I can see Suzanne is now parented to the cube, or this Suzanne anyway. So if I were to click the cube and press G to grab, Suzanne head's now parented. One unfortunate thing about this is you can't parent multiple objects. So say I wanted to parent the rest of these Suzanne heads. So if I were to select this Suzanne head and then shift select each one of these, and we can see these are all selected because the little icon has become highlighted. And then so if I were to click and then drag them to drop over the cube, you see the instant I click that the rest of the Suzannes here get unselected. So for selecting more than one object, it's best to press T and bring up our tool shelf and use our parent button here. So I could press B to do a border select of all these and then shift select the cube and press parent there. And so then they would all be parented. And you can also unparent anything by clicking the item by its icon and just dragging it away from that. So you'll see the message drop to clear parent show up, and then you can just click, and now this Suzanne head has been removed out of this parent relationship here. So if we click click the cube and press G to grab, this one no longer moves. So we can actually parent and unparent things in the outliner, which is a nice little bonus. Another handy feature of the outliner here, if I click this plus sign to expand all of the objects that are parented to this cube, we can select all of the objects that are parented here just by holding Control and then clicking on the object. And you see they become selected here in the 3D view. Likewise, we could hide the visibility by holding Control, and this would hide the visibility of not only the cube, but all the parented objects, as well as turning off renderability. We could lock all of those objects simultaneously, and see now I can't click on any of them in the 3D view while I still can click on this one. I'm going to go over to my examples folder, then my physics playground, and press my library expand button. And here is the physicsplayground.blend, the file that I made for the physics playground animation. So I'll click and drag this out into the 3D view to open this up. And I wanted to open up this file to give an example of what the outliner looks like when it's just absolutely loaded down with things. So we've got, quite a bunch of things here in this scene. But we can use this search bar to search for specific things. If I were to click in here and type in ball, anything with the word ball will pop up. So that's nice to have that search menu. We can also change what items are displayed in this menu here. So by default, this is kept on visible layers. So basically this means whatever layers we have pressed down here, all the items within these layers should show up in our outliner. And I'll go ahead and hide my library there. So if I were to just say click on this layer here, then only the items that are in this layer show up in our outliner, which these are all broken pieces of glass actually, having to do with how I set up the glass shattering scene. And so if I click on this layer down here, you see we actually only have this one scene shadows lamp in this layer, and then we click on this layer, we have most of our objects that compose our scene here. If you only want to have selected objects displayed, you could click selected, and then whatever objects you select, so say I select this little piece here and then shift select these other pieces like this, only the items you have selected will show up there. If you need to do different kind of stuff to that, so we could change this to what it is in default Blender, which is current scene. So this is basically everything in your scene. I typically kind of find this to be a little more than I need. That's why we usually keep this on visible layers, but you have access to more advanced information about your environment and stuff like that too. So real quickly, just a few more things before we go. You may have noticed down here in the default Sensei format scene that next to camera is this little dash, and as well as next to scene light. The point of putting this dash before the camera and the scene light is that the outliner is by default displayed in alphabetical order. And so typically symbols like these dashes or numbers are going to be listed before any letters. And so it's nice to be able to keep items that aren't kind of like your main mesh items. So we come down to the header of the outliner and we use our middle mouse button to just scroll this menu to the side here, or you can hold shift and press down on the middle mouse to move these little menus here. And we click this option here. So you see under view here, we have some more options about how the outliner is displayed. So we have sort alphabetically. Typically want to keep that on because if that's not on, it doesn't mean that you all of a sudden have control of the way these items are placed, because you really don't. So it's really, not much improved situation if we, turn this off here. It's not going to display all these items together. So for instance, if I were to double right click over here and add an armature, and we'll get into what armatures are and stuff in the future, but say I were to duplicate this a bunch of times, and then say I were to double right click over here and add a UV sphere here, notice that the sphere and the cube aren't kept together. And this isn't the case whether or not you have sort alphabetically on or not. It just happened to be that alphabetically these are kept in the same order, but if I were to say name this armature Z Great Armature, see that it jumps down to the bottom here because this is now in alphabetical order from least to greatest. So we don't really have super tight control over keeping these items together. Now there is an option here. If we change this to same types, then we can at the very least only see the type of object we have selected. So there are now 4 armatures in this scene, even though each of these armatures just contains a single bone here, because we haven't really gone into them and done anything with them. They just look like single bones, but they are entire armatures. So if we click on one armature, we'll see all the different armatures in this scene. Or if we click on one of these mesh items, so we have like this cube and this sphere, these are both mesh items, then you'll see all the mesh items in the scene. So if I were to double right click over here and add a monkey or add a cylinder, so we do have the ability to see same types, but in general, we're not, if I switch this back to visible layers here, whether or not this is set to sort alphabetically, the items aren't displayed by type. One last really cool thing we can do with the outliner is directly drag and drop objects from the outliner into the 3D view. So I've got this cube here, I could just click it by its icon and then just drag it out into the 3D view here, and wherever I let go, it's going to add that object. So that's not very impressive when we're just dealing with a simple cube, but say I were to go into my examples folder and maybe click on this 2013 folder, click my expand library button here and say open up this hat file by just dragging it into my 3D view, which opens up that file, and I'll close that. So I've got this hat here, so I can just click and drag and add these objects at will. In the same way that we can't parent or unparent multiple objects in the outliner, we can do one object at a time. We also can't drag out more than one object, so that's kind of lame, but there is a workaround to that that's actually a much better way to do that. Say for instance I were to scale this hat down really small, bring it over here and just call this small hat, I suppose. If we're working with groups, when we drag a grouped object out, it creates an instance of that object, as we learned about in our groups and group instancing video, which if you haven't watched, I super highly recommend you watch that video. But for instance, say we were to make a selection of hats here. I'll press S to scale this one and then call this one tall hat. So say I were to make a group of hats by pressing B to do a border select and selecting all 3 of these, then pressing Control G to turn those into a group, or you can of course press Shift A and under groups here, press create group. So if we were to come down here in the outliner, right click and press view groups, here is our tall hat group here. We could actually go ahead and move this to another layer, say this layer down here. I could press M to move what's selected to this other layer down here. And then so the actual objects themselves, the group, exists in this layer, but whenever we click and drag one of these groups into the 3D view, we'll get an instance of that group and not the group itself. So one thing I don't like about the way these groups are instanced is the size of these empties. So I like to always turn that down as soon as it gets made. But that's really cool. So we could say animate this. I could tap F to insert a keyframe and then G to grab and maybe R to rotate, press F to insert another keyframe, and then I press back and press play. So there's that little group instance of hats doing like that. And say I click and drag another instance out here, and I'll scale that down because I don't like that. I could animate this too. I could press F to insert a keyframe there, then maybe press S to scale or G to grab, do something wacky with that, tap F again. And so now I've got these 2 different instances of these hats here, which are from this group here. So whatever we change in the group is going to show up in each one of the instances. So for instance, if I were to press tab to edit this big hat here and say tap space for a face selection and then alt select the rim of this hat here and press E to extrude, something like this, then press tab to go back into object mode, and then I go back here. Of course, these changes have all propagated to the rest of these group instances here, and they still have their same animations there. I could say press B to do a border select, select these frames here, right click to drag my timeline cursor and just drop it there at the 2-second mark, press D to duplicate these, and then click and let go anywhere near that timeline and they'll snap to it. And so I've got something like that. So that pretty much sums it up for the outliner. A lot of information was given in this video. You might want to go back and watch it a couple of times, try all these features out, get used to them and get used to using them because they can really help your workflow and work speed in Blender.